Okay, so we're about to begin. So once again, thank you for coming to this webinar on travel insurance. I'd like to introduce Megan, and Victoria from InsureMy Trip, who will take the lead in this webinar, and then we will have Q&A. I'll just be here moderating any tech issues you may have, but I will be on mute. So with that, I will turn it over to them.
Matt. Hi, I'm Megan Kayada. I am the PR specialist for InsureMy Trip slash media expert, I guess. For InsureMy Trip, I have a PowerPoint presentation that'll pop up so you don't have to look at our faces the whole time. So it's a little bit more interesting. We hopefully keep your attention on the importance of travel insurance here. So I'm going to start sharing my screen with you. Everybody see that okay? All right, perfect. So we're calling this webinar Travel Insurance Made Simple because travel insurance is generally not simple. Again, I'm Megan Kayada. I've been with the company for 3 years now. When I started, I knew nothing about travel insurance, absolutely nothing. I just made assumptions about it that turned out not to be true. So now that I've been here for as long as I have, I would always consider travel insurance whenever I travel, especially out of the country, which we will get a little bit more into in a little bit. But yeah, so I definitely, it's for everybody. I'll just foreshadow there. But somebody who does know everything about travel insurance, because I certainly do not yet, because there's so many caveats, is Megan Walsh. She's our director of product. So Megan, why don't you give a little bit of your background?
Sure. So yeah, I've been with InsureMy Trip for a little over 15 years now. I started with our customer care team back all those years and have moved up the ranks and now work with a team of insurance product analysts. And we work with many of the major travel insurance providers, and we pick the products that will appear on our site, insuremytrip.com.
Perfect. So speaking of insuremytrip.com, let's intro that. So we are an international company. We are a travel insurance comparison site. We have offices in Warwick in the US and in Canada right now. Warwick, Rhode Island, for those who don't know, sorry. We, like Megan said, we work with the best travel insurance companies and providers and that kind of stuff. So we compare, when you come to our site, you can compare travel insurance policies and providers, which is really nice. So we kind of make it easy for you, and you can not customize, but you can find the right one for you, but you're not pigeonholed to a specific company or policy. So that makes it a little bit easier, we hope. So we know that travel insurance is overwhelming, and that's why we're kind of doing this to make it simple. So today we're going to be touching on a few different points to kind of get that point across. Travel insurance myths, because like I said, when I first started working here, I believed certain things about travel insurance that turned out not to be true. So we'll get into some of those myths and kind of try and bust those for you guys. Emergency medical, kind of getting into the different coverages that are offered. So emergency medical is a big one. And I foreshadowed that a little bit earlier when I said when I leave the country, I will always get travel insurance. Comprehensive plans, we'll get into those, which is a little bit more robust coverage for you. Natural disasters and extreme weather. These topics have been in the news so much lately, and we've been getting a lot of questions about this. So we want to touch base on that a little bit and talk about how travel insurance can help in those instances. Also, point of sale trip protection. We're talking about, booking sites, cruise lines, airlines at the end of when you're purchasing a ticket or a product. They ask you if you want travel insurance. So we're going to get into those and who offers them and why maybe it's not the best idea. Same with credit card insurance. I think a lot of people think that because of they have insurance on their credit card, they don't need travel insurance. Sorry, I have a dog in a package. And then we'll get into some Q&A. So save your questions. Hopefully you don't have a ton of questions. Hopefully we do a good job. But anyway, so let's get into some myths. So these are kind of myths that we've heard throughout the years, and that I've myself had ideas about travel insurance. That it's unnecessary because I have health insurance, only for older travelers, that it's too expensive, that my credit card or the point of sale insurance is enough. It's only for international trips. You don't need it for short trips, and you can buy it at any time. So those are some kind of myths that we'll be getting into, and kind of talking about why those aren't necessarily true. So let's start with emergency medical and medical evac. So this is a big one, and I think a lot of people, when they think travel insurance, this is what they think of. But Megan, why don't you get into why travel insurance is especially important for international trips?
Sure. And it's a really great question. And I think when we start talking about this, the first thing to know is if you have domestic health coverage, what does it cover? Does it cover anything abroad? You might be surprised to find out that it doesn't cover anything. So great to know what you're looking at with your domestic health coverage first. If you're going to be traveling outside of the country, may also be a good idea to research any common illnesses or injuries and what it may cost to treat those things in a foreign country. And from there, you can then come to our site, compare policies, and look at the different coverage limits that may be available and what fulfills your needs and your comfort level.
Yeah, so you may have to do a little bit of research, but it's always a good idea to find out first, because like Megan said, it's not likely you're not covered when you go abroad, and really anything can happen. Especially, I was in Aruba a few years back, and I was sitting by the pool, and this little boy I'd seen earlier came back in a cast. So he broke his leg while in Aruba, and that was not cheap for his parents. Let's just put it that way. Ooh, sorry. Okay. But domestic too, you may have to consider coverage. Is that right, Megan? Because of Medicare and what it may or may not cover when you're traveling domestically.
Yeah, so whether it's Medicare or a domestic healthcare coverage, if you're traveling outside of your state, you may be out of network, something like that. So it can also be a good idea to check out a comprehensive travel insurance plan that offers some amount of emergency medical coverage if you're going to be traveling somewhere, just in case, because travel insurance can help to cover above and beyond what your domestic health coverage may not.
Yeah, finding people that are in network too can be tricky sometimes.
Can I just add something quickly?
Yes.
Again, I'm going to turn on my camera. Here it is. I have yet to find a policy that does cover overseas travel from Americans, and I will say that as someone who also was at one point on sort of one of the marketplace Obamacare plans, I've also found that if I need coverage in a different state, it's very limited too. Like pretty much they did like urgent care, and that was like it. And if I needed any follow-up tests, they didn't do that. So don't assume just because you have US healthcare, like your coverage out of state lines. I found that out the hard way.
And
I wasn't even like quote unquote traveling. I was just like visiting a friend, so just trying to do that.
And that's another thing, like you were saying, like we were saying earlier, it's not just for long trips, it can be for short trips too. So, that's it's always important, not to be a Debbie Downer, but again, it's anything can happen, right? So it's always good to be prepared. Another myth that we kind of didn't, it goes along with your domestic health insurance, is pre-existing conditions, but it's not always the case that you can't get coverage, correct, Megan?
That's correct. So, depending on the type of policy that you're looking at, if you're looking at a comprehensive plan, it may include something that we call a pre-existing condition waiver. So there is a possibility that you could have coverage for conditions that existed. Um, so with this, as I mentioned, it can be a waiver that is on some comprehensive travel insurance plans, and can allow coverage for pre-existing conditions. It typically waives the pre-existing exclusion that would allow the company to look back in your medical records, usually somewhere around 2 to 6 months prior to your purchase of the policy, um, to see if whatever you're making a claim for is related to something pre-existing. So just to put it in simple terms, if you have concerns that an active pre-existing condition could be an issue during your trip, it may be the best to look at a plan that offers this waiver. And if you do have specific questions, obviously everybody is different, and all conditions may be are going to be looked at in the situation that they happen during a claims if a claim is filed. So with that, if there's any questions about your specific condition, something like that, you can call our customer care team. They're licensed customer care reps, and they can dig deeper and give you more information as to what may or may not be covered.
Yeah, and this is one of those situations where can be confusing. I still get confused about the pre-existing condition waiver, but that's why we say to give us a call. We are the experts. We can help you. We can walk you through whatever questions you may have about it. Because again, our goal as a company is to help travelers and educate travelers about travel insurance and why it might be important. And sometimes even let them know like when they don't need insurance or when it's, there isn't a plan that covers what they're looking for. So we're not trying to pigeonhole you into anything. So I think for a pre-existing condition, don't just assume you aren't covered. Kind of find out and learn from us.
Yeah, and we'll get into some more of the details about the pre-existing condition waiver a little bit later.
Yeah. Yes. Stay tuned. So let's kind of put this into action, the medical coverage, emergency medical coverage, and some real life scenarios that may or may not have really happened. So you're walking down a cobblestone street in a historic city in Europe, and you roll your ankle, fall, break your arm while trying to catch yourself. Megan, is this covered?
So it can be covered, and I'll caveat it here, as long as it's an accidental injury and you're not doing anything illegal at the time, the treatment for that can be covered.
Big deal. I mean, we'll show you later on how expensive hospital stays in Europe can be, and it's expensive. So let's do scenario 1.5. And a follow-up to this is if you're walking down a cobblestone street in Europe after drinking in a pub, you fall and roll your ankle and break your arm. Is it covered?
With that one, typically under travel insurance policies, if you are under the influence or intoxicated, that may exclude coverage. So be smart when you're traveling, and having alcohol could cause coverage to be excluded.
What did we say, Victoria? Don't drink in cobblestone. Be aware. All right, scenario 2. You have high blood pressure and you're looking to buy travel insurance. This kind of gets into that pre-existing condition waiver. Megan, can you explain what would happen if you're looking for travel insurance and you have high blood pressure?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I'm going to speak in sort of general terms here, because again, everyone's condition may be different, and this will be looked at much closer in the event a claim is filed. But typically, if a condition has been controlled for the past 2 to 6 months prior to purchase of the policy, with no changes in that condition, no changes in medication, you haven't had to visit the doctor or have any tests related to that condition, then it may not be considered pre-existing. If, on the other hand, you have had to visit the doctor, you've had some diagnostic tests, any changes in medication within that time period prior to purchase of the policy, then most likely it's going to be considered pre-existing, and you're going to want to look at a policy that offers the waiver. And there are some requirements in order to obtain the waiver. Usually you have to be purchasing the plan within 2 to 3 weeks after making your first payment or deposit towards your trip. You have to insure typically the full prepaid non-refundable trip cost and also be medically fit to travel at the time of purchase.
Again, like I think what most of what we're talking about too, we're not talking specifics here. We're kind of doing an overview and just trying to explain it at super high level because again, every case is different, everybody's different. So again, just kind of keep that in mind as we go along here. Another big one that's going around is that terrible flu. I know a friend of mine has it and very sick. You catch the flu and you're too sick to travel. Is that covered?
Typically, that can be covered if it's an unforeseen illness. A doctor verifies that you're too sick to travel. Typically, that would be a covered reason to cancel your trip and receive reimbursement.
Right. And it's important too when you are looking at a policy and you're looking to file a claim for it, making sure that you know what is covered under your policy, knowing that the parameters and making sure you do have that doctor's note if you can't travel, like stuff like just make sure that you understand the process if you do have to cancel. That's very important too. And again, that's one of those things that we can help walk you through for us. So now we're going to get into comprehensive plans. Again, like I was saying, these these are kind of like the more bang for your buck type plans, and they also include travel medical. So if you're looking for a little bit extra coverage or a lot of it extra coverage, this is a good option for you. So Megan, why don't you get into what is covered generally in a comprehensive plan?
Sure. So trip cancellation, trip interruption, baggage loss and delay, emergency medical evacuation, those are typically the core coverages of a comprehensive plan. Some may have some additional options and benefits, such as accidental death and dismemberment coverage, also coverage if you're renting a car and need coverage for any damage done to it, adventure activities, and then there's also cancel for any reason and interruption for any reason, which I know we'll get a little bit more into later.
Yes, two good options to add on there for your comprehensive plan. Another interesting fact is about comprehensive plans and travel insurance is that it may offer coverage for a non-traveling family member at home if they become ill or injured and your trip needs to be canceled or interrupted. Can you explain this, Megan, how this would pertain to somebody who's not traveling?
Sure. So this would most likely fall under the trip cancellation or interruption, and it may not technically be coverage for them, but if there is a non-traveling family member at home that becomes ill or injured, or in the unfortunate case passes away, there may be coverage under the plan to cancel or interrupt your trip if you have to return home early. And it's important to read the details of the policy, as Megan mentioned earlier. And one thing here is to be aware of the definition of a family member, because that will tell you what, who at home may be covered in the event something happens, and, allow you to, again, cancel or interrupt the trip.
Perfect. All right, now let's get into it with the real life. I think these are kind of put things into perspective, right? The real life scenario. So let's get into the first one. You make it to Italy or your destination, but your baggage is still in the US and now you're left without clothes, other necessities. How would travel insurance kick in for this, or would it kick in, Megan?
Sure. So if your luggage delayed for the required number of hours, typically, depending on the plan, it could be anywhere from 6 to 24 hours. There will be a certain amount of reimbursement for necessary items. You'd probably need some kind of proof from the airline that your bag was delayed, a claim was filed there. And should just note that reimbursement is for necessary items, unfortunately not a new wardrobe. So at least you can get some, clothes to hold you over.
Yes. Anything is better than nothing, right? Instead of having to shell out all that money while you wait for a toothbrush or what, like the little things add up, right? Like you don't want to be left without things. Okay, another scenario. This is kind of one that came to light or was more frequent recently, flight delays and cancellations. So your flight is delayed for hours and you miss your tour or cruise departure. Is it covered?
Yeah, it's a really great question. As you said, something that we've been hearing a lot of lately. So plans, comprehensive plans can have travel delay benefits, which can help to reimburse for meals, transportation, accommodations needed when your flight is severely delayed. And again, there's a required number of hours that your flight must be delayed before these benefits can kick in. Typically, that's anywhere from 5 to 12 hours. In some cases, policies may also have a missed connection benefit that can come into play if your flight is delayed for a covered reason and you miss a cruise departure. It can help to reimburse expenses to help you catch up to that trip. Couple of things to keep in mind. You must have booked your flight with enough time to make your cruise departure. And I think from what we've been hearing from a lot of experienced cruisers is to arrive at least a day before your cruise departure for even more breathing room there. And if you booked any flights, you have to make sure that there's enough time to make your connections. So booking a connecting flight with, say, maybe only an hour or less layover may not be sufficient, and in the long run could cause a claim to be denied.
And it can cause a lot of stress.
Definitely, definitely.
Avoid the stress there.
Yes.
Okay, so that's that. All right. A loved one becomes ill back home and you have to cut your trip short. Megan, is that covered? It's kind of what we talked about already.
Yeah, so trip interruption coverage can come into play as long as all the conditions are met that we discussed earlier. You know, they fall under the definition of a family member. And typically, you know, this person must be so ill that you have to return home to either care for them or something like that there. So with trip interruption benefits, it can allow for reimbursement of the unused prepaid non-refundable expenses. And depending on the policy, there may also be some extra included to accommodate the extra expense for an emergency one-way ticket home. So again, another thing to look at when you are comparing policies, the trip interruption limit and, you know, how much additional they may offer in the event that you do need an emergency ticket back home.
Again, it helps with the stress level too when you're worried about getting home to a loved one who needs you and you need to go home and care for, and you don't want to worry about losing again on top of that, losing money that you spent on this trip. So it's important. So another thing that's been in the news a lot lately, natural disasters and extreme weather. I mean, we've had the California wildfires, southern snow and ice, which crippled travel down there, not just air travel, but, car travel. People don't know how to drive in the snow. There was recently some earthquakes in Greece, and of course, Caribbean hurricanes always in the news around hurricane season. So for acts of God, Megan, how can travel insurance provide coverage?
Yeah, so that's another really great question. And I think here, I know we're going to keep mentioning this, but it's important to know what is covered. So what is the definition of a natural disaster? Being familiar with that. But typically travel insurance may allow coverage for trip cancellation or interruption in the event that a natural disaster could either make your primary residence or your destination accommodations uninhabitable. So there also may be coverage on some policies in the event of a mandatory evacuation at your destination that could cause you to lose the majority of your trip. There may also be travel delay coverage in the event that your flight is delayed due to weather. You incur additional expenses for meals, transportation, accommodations, as we mentioned before. And then some plans may also offer coverage to cancel your trip in the event that there's a hurricane warning at your departure or destination city within a certain number of hours prior to departure. So usually somewhere between 28 to 48 hours. So that one can be super helpful if you're traveling to an area that may typically be hit by hurricanes.
Yeah, for sure. I think we all worry when you're traveling around hurricane season. It's
Definitely.
definitely top of mind. So what are some tips that you would give people if they're concerned about natural disasters impacting a trip?
Yeah, so I think with this, purchase your policy early. With that, the most important thing to know, I guess, would be if something occurs, an event occurs, it's known and it will no longer be covered. So you want to make sure that you're purchasing any travel insurance policy prior to an event occurring or becoming known. And then also cancel for any reason can be super helpful because we've been talking about trip cancellation and covered reasons, but you know, it could come down to you just saying, I don't feel comfortable traveling at this point. And you've put all this money into it, you have non-refundable expenses. So we'll go into a bit more detail later with cancel for any reason, but this can give you the flexibility to cancel the trip if you just don't feel comfortable going.
Yeah. So speaking of that, let's get into that. Let's get into some cancel for any reason. We've been teasing it this whole time. So let's do it. Let's get into what is cancel for any reason? What are the requirements? All the things.
Yeah, so with this, it is a time sensitive benefit. So, like the pre existing condition waiver, you typically have to be purchasing the policy within 2 to 3 weeks after making your initial trip payment or deposit. You have to ensure the full prepaid non refundable cost of the trip. And one thing about this benefit is you must be canceling at least 48 hours prior to departure. So with that, we like to say, up until 2 days before departure, you have this cancel for any reason option. So again, if it just comes down to, I don't feel comfortable traveling, you can cancel. If you're within 2 days of departure, though, this cancel for any reason is not available. So just with that, one thing to keep in mind, make the decision early, at least 2 days prior to departure, if you think you're going to need it.
And some kind of add-on things here.
Yep.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry about that. So yeah, it is an add-on benefit. So it will cost a little bit more to add it to the policy. Reimbursement under cancel for any reason is typically 50 to 75% of your prepaid non-refundable trip cost. So you're not getting the whole amount back as you would if you were canceling for a covered reason listed within the policy, but at least you can get the majority of what you've spent back. And, again, typical reasons for cancel for any reason could be fear of travel, if there's fear of war or conflict occurring. One thing to note, a friend's illness. Again, if it's someone at home, they don't fall under the definition of a family member, then you would want cancel for any reason if you have any concerns there. And then, you could also just have change of mind. I just not feeling this and gonna cancel this trip.
Perfect. So let's get into real life scenarios for natural disasters and extreme weather. A hurricane hits your resort in the Caribbean. Before you get there, is there coverage?
So, great question. And as long as you've purchased the policy prior to the storm being named and hitting the location, there may be coverage if the resort is uninhabitable. So that would be if there's no power, no water, and they can't operate normally.
Perfect. Follow up to that. What if a hurricane hits while you're on vacation? Is that covered while you're at the resort?
Sure. So there could be coverage if there's a mandatory evacuation ordered and it causes you to miss out on most of your trip. Um, I think whether you have insurance or not, the most important thing is just to get out of harm's way. So that should be, priority number one. And, you know, you can look at the list of covered reasons under trip interruption and, see if any may fit what is happening to you.
Perfect. Another one that's a big one, the wildfire destroys your home before you're set to travel. This kind of happened a lot in California recently. So would that be covered under travel insurance?
That can be. Typically, policies will cover if your primary residence is damaged prior to departure. So again, good to know the terms of the policy, and there could be coverage there.
Perfect. This is another one. You had a trip planned for LA, but you're concerned about the wildfires that recently hit there. Would that be covered if you decide, I don't want to go?
Yeah, that's a great question. And, traveling to areas surrounding where these events are occurring, could be outside of some people's comfort zone. So with that, I'd say cancel for any reason would be your best bet. We talked about that before, but that can give you at least some reimbursement in the event that you're not comfortable continuing going on the trip.
Perfect. So now let's get into our next segment. I'm gonna kind of go through this a little bit more quickly. Point of sale trip protection. So what we're talking about here is when you're offered trip protection or travel insurance at the end of when you're booking on a booking site, cruise line, airlines. We like to say we call that don't check the box, meaning it's very convenient, but we say be cautious of this convenience. In terms of, we're talking about point of sale versus third party insurance. So let's use cruise lines as an example. Why is a third party, Megan, better than maybe a cruise line travel insurance offering?
Yeah, so it's great to, come to a site like ours where you can plug in your trip information and see a list of policies to compare. With point of sale travel insurance policies, there may be a limited number of reasons for canceling a trip. Most won't cover pre-existing conditions. Medical coverage is typically lower. Cancel for any reason is typically offered through the cruise line as a type of a waiver versus these third-party travel insurance companies that we offer, which gives you a cash refund. So, I think it's something to look at there. Do you want a cash refund versus a credit or a voucher? Most will not cover a financial default of a cruise line or other common carrier. And typically, a cruise plan will not cover the full trip cost. So you're booking your own flights, accommodations separately from the cruise. You would most likely need a separate policy to cover those expenses. So with a third-party travel insurance plan, you can insure all of them on one policy, which can make things a lot easier in the event of a claim. And most cruise lines plans will not include inconvenience benefits like you might find with some third-party cruise specific plans.
Yeah. Same with credit card insurance. I think a lot of people think that they don't need insurance because their credit card offers them insurance. So what are some kind of shortcomings there?
Yeah, so credit cards can offer some protection. However, it may not provide the same amount of coverage that you can get from a traditional third-party travel insurance. So you can generally only cover the portion of the trip that you pay with the credit card. So if you paid for things on separate cards, you might have to look and see what's actually covered by each, if anything. And some of the same things with the other point of sale coverage that we were mentioning. It may be lower limits of coverage, less covered reasons. So it's good to know what's actually covered. And yeah, you might be able to find something a lot more comprehensive on if you're comparing coverage.
Yeah, so let's kind of get into that, the benefits of purchasing kind of on InsureMyTrip.com and other
Yep.
third parties, but specifically InsureMyTrip.com.
Yeah, so with that, if you purchase third-party travel insurance, you can cover the entire cost of the trip. There's going to be more robust, like core benefits to the plan, including emergency medical coverage, emergency medical evacuation, trip interruption, travel delay, baggage coverage. And then another important is 24/7 emergency assistance. So that can be anything from helping you to find a doctor or hospital while you're on your trip, as well as some other concierge benefits that may be available.
Yeah, that's super helpful to know that you can pick up the phone and call somebody and not have to like get the runaround to find out.
Definitely.
I'm going to skip through these real life scenarios just so we have some more. We have time at the end for some Q&A. Let's get into the cost of travel insurance because I think with travel costs going up, I think a lot of people are kind of leery or don't want to spend the extra amount on travel insurance. So this is always a big one we get. How much does travel insurance cost? And generally, we like to say 4 to 10% of your total prepaid non-refundable trip costs. It's a mouthful. But for example, if your trip costs $1,000, you can expect to pay anywhere between $40 and $100 for a policy, depending on several factors. So Megan, what are those factors that may impact the cost?
Yeah, so with that, it can be age of the travelers, number of travelers, the length of the trip, and also the type or amount of coverage. So, if you have certain add-ons such as CFAR that you may be looking at, policies could become more expensive. But really, we offer a wide range, low amounts of coverage if you don't have that many concerns to, some really high limit plans.
Yeah, and I myself have utilized our customer care, our licensed travel insurance agents, and I've kind of told them what my concerns are and what I want to have covered, and they've found the plans that kind of meet my needs and my budget. So that's super helpful to know that just because if you feel like you don't have a high budget for travel insurance, you can still get some kind of coverage that can really come in handy. And I'm going to explain why that can come in handy. Right now, let's put things into perspective. Medical costs abroad. Now, this is a general idea of what costs could be for hospital stays when you are abroad. Now, we like to think that other countries have cheaper medical expenses and bills, but it depends on where you are and what the situation is. So if you're in Switzerland, it could cost upwards of $30,000 to stay in a hospital for a few days. Other European hospitals can cost $5,000 and upwards. Rescue costs can cost for $100 to $500. Medical evacuation, I mean, from anywhere really can cost upwards of $100,000 or more when you are traveling abroad. So that kind of gives you into perspective as to how much we're talking when we're thinking, because I think a lot of people think that the medical expenses abroad is not that much, but it can add up. It really can. And why pay that if you can just pay for a plan? So I guess the question is like, what would you able to file a claim for like these kind of things, Megan? Like how does travel insurance better having this stuff?
Yeah, so, again, look at the details of the policy. If it looks like it's something, covered illness or injury, file a claim and they will review everything from start to finish. And yeah, so I just say that,
Yeah,
God
right.
forbid something happens, file a claim and go from there.
Yeah, to put things into perspective, like we say, it's, you hope not to use this and you really you're like every other insurance that you kind of get, you're like, I hate spending this money. But then when something happens and, you file a claim and you can get that money back. And it relieves the stress of dealing with an injury or an illness when you're abroad in general. But something before we leave, I wanted to mention before we wrap up, we are working on something exciting with InsureMy Trip. It's a sub brand we're calling So Venture. It's designed specifically for nomads, adventure travelers. There will be products that address travel medical for short and long term, because we know, like, when you're traveling, when you're a digital nomad or an adventure traveler, that's kind of top of mind for you is your medical insurance. So it will address that. We'll also have comprehensive coverage, adventure and extreme sports that you can customize for your coverage. So that's an exciting thing that's coming up. We have InsureMy Trip. We've been around for 25 years. So we have the experience in travel insurance, and we've been listening to what our customers have been wanting and needing. So this is kind of filling that gap and refining what we offer and how we offer it. So more to come on this, but we will be, as we grow, we'll be adding coverage and kind of growing the community, and we're listening to you. So if you are a digital nomad or planning on nomading and or are concerned and want to are an adventure traveler, so this is kind of exciting, our latest initiative for that. So we are excited. More to come on this. But again, just keep an eye out. It's So Venture is the name of it. So we're really excited about this one. And then that is it for us. So again, if you have any questions outside of this and you kind of want to learn a little bit more about travel insurance and the different coverages, you can always go to InsureMyTrip.com. We have a ton of educational learn articles in there. And then you can always email our customer care team and kind of ask questions there, customer care at InsureMyTrip.com. And then if you want to have any questions for just me or Megan, just outside of this or just general questions, you can insure my trip. Oh, that's not right. It's insuremytrip.com. I don't know what happened there. And then also follow us on social media, Insure My Trip at Insure My Trip. And then for our So Venture one, it's at Go So Venture. So that wraps things up for us.
All right. There's a lot of questions, and I think we're gonna get to all the questions in the next 15-ish minutes. So I will go through as many as I can. I will read them and you can answer them. All right. Let's see. Again, they're just very specific, so we'll do our best to answer them. Always caveats. Patricia asks, do we need a pre-existing waiver to cover diabetes?
So that I would say potentially. As we mentioned before, everybody's situation is different. So I would say if there are concerns for that, it may be a good idea to call and speak with one of our licensed customer care reps, just so you can go over all the details and they can make some recommendations on what coverage you may or may not need.
That's going to be true for pretty much everyone asking, like, what about me specifically? So I will probably skip over those questions, but James has a really good question that I think a lot of people ask. James says, when I traveled to Scotland last May, my friends there told me I do not need health insurance as the UK has universal health care and I would be covered no matter what. Is that true? And are there other countries where I would not need health insurance? And I like this question because, you know, in a lot of countries in the world that do have universal health care, you will get treated. It's not going to be like the States, but, you know, there are costs sometimes. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I guess it really depends, if you're ready to pay anything out of pocket, because your domestic health coverage may not cover anything over there, then that's up to you. But I know if it were me, I definitely have some coverage in place. Just God forbid something does happen and you come home with a few extra bills. At least this can help to reimburse anything you might have to pay out of pocket, as long as it's a covered event. then it can be helpful to have coverage there.
And I think too, it's important to keep in mind that emergency medical isn't the only travel insurance coverage that may come in handy, because I think we've seen
Yes.
so often that flight delays and cancellations have been happening abundantly, and there was a time there when everybody's bags got lost. So it's these little things that come up that cause extra stress to a trip, that these can really kind of alleviate that stress and not having to worry about spending the extra money on these things.
Yeah, I would also add that, it's travel insurance is not just health insurance. Like you said, it's like covers lost items, stolen items, um, delays, et cetera, et cetera. But also, if you get really injured in France and they're like, come on in, but you have to go home, like, because you need something, or there's a surgery or something that might not be covered, um, if you don't have travel insurance, you're gonna foot that bill. So, sure, like if you break a toe, not a big deal. But if you get severely injured, you have to come home and you need medical attention on the way home. France isn't covered. The UK is not covering that.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Kathy just asked a quick question. Is Allianz Insurance one of the companies you offer?
So not currently on our site right now. Um,
Okay. All right. If I'm planning on traveling in Asia for 6 months, this is a question from Johnny. But want emergency medical insurance, but we'll be in the US for 3 weeks during that time. How do I get US coverage as an add-on, as I won't have health insurance?
well, that's a great question. So with that, you can look at some uh, travel medical plans. They may have uh, some supplemental coverage if you're in your home country temporarily for a certain amount of time. Um, yeah, so it may be good to look at that and see if it fits the time periods that you need coverage for. Um, yeah, off the top of my head, I'm not sure, exactly how long you can be home, but I know there are some plans that can offer coverage if you're away from home for an extended time and then uh, return back home for just a short temporary period.
Yeah, I would also add that adding on domestic coverage will also greatly increase the price of your insurance. So just keep that in mind. Um, this is a good question. Patricia asked, yearly coverage or specific trip insurance coverage? What's the sort of benefit to one versus the other?
So right now, for plans that you can purchase for multiple trips taken throughout a year, we have some emergency medical and also emergency medical evacuation plans. We don't offer currently comprehensive coverage that can be purchased for all trips during the year. And I think need to sort of look at the types of trips that you're taking, and might your concerns for one trip be different than another. Are you traveling with your family on one trip and traveling alone or with others on another? So if your concerns for potentially having to cancel or interrupt your trip may be different, it may behoove you to look at individual policies for those travels versus a single annual policy.
Pat asks, we kind of discussed this a little bit, but he got the Chase Sapphire Reserve, which is a premium credit card. How does that coverage compare with trip insurance plans? I will answer this question.
Before.
Those credit cards, even the top tier ones, have and you touched on this in your presentation, very limited coverage. Like, yeah, they have coverage, but they are not comprehensive to high maximums in case something really bad happens. They will not cover a host of trip delays and anything that's like not bought on the card, right? Like let's say you bought something that wasn't on the Chase card, not covered. But also haven't had friends deal with Chase on reimbursement. They drag their feet more than you would like. You know, there's always documentation and information needed by any insurance company. But my friends who went with just Chase vowed never to do it again. And they were travel writers, so they knew the ins and outs of how to do things. I just never think it's a good idea to solely rely on credit card insurance. It's one thing to rely on it for like purchase insurance or maybe, something related to like a trip delay with your flight you bought on. But if you're looking for like actual good coverage in case something really goes wrong, you're gonna want something more. You know, Chase isn't there to be like get you home after you've like been hit by a bus.
And just one thing to add to that as well, with our licensed customer care agents, we also do have an advocate program where if you are filing a claim and say it is denied, we can take a second look at that and look to see the details, what might have happened, if it is something that has been rightfully denied, or if it's something to send back to the insurance company. And our team can, sort of work as a middle person to figure out the details there. So I think that's a really great benefit. If you purchase through InsureMy Trip, you also can have that as well.
Yeah, like you were saying, I think too, it's the getting in contact with them. It like credit card companies is torture. Even if you just have a general question, never mind like want to file a claim or get money back from them, forget it. So I think that's what's really great about, again, when you have insurance through a third party, you have the 24-hour assistance that can help you during your trip when you're dealing with an issue. And then after, like Megan said, we have that advocate program that really goes to bat for you if you really feel like your claim shouldn't have been denied. And it's sometimes it's so easy of just like a paperwork error. You forgot to submit something and they act as that middleman to kind of help you figure out why it was denied, versus if you're working with a credit card company, they're not going to sit there and be like, this is just denied because you forgot to hand this in. They'll just be like, sorry, Charlie.
Good question here. Is CFAR not available in some locations? I just tried to find it for a 1-week trip to Costa Rica and it wasn't available on your site.
So with that, there could be a couple of reasons why it's not showing. First of all, if you booked your trip more than say 3 weeks ago, if you put an initial trip payment further in the past, it could invalidate that coverage. Also, it may not be available to residents of all states. So New York is a state that typically does not offer that coverage. Yeah, I think those would be the two big reasons why it might not be available. Yeah.
A couple of people ask when they should buy insurance. They say, I booked my flight, I have my lodging. When should I buy travel insurance?
To get the most benefit out of your policy and also to make sure you're buying it before any issues become known, I would say once you put money down on this trip, go right ahead and buy the insurance. That's going to give you the most options available and again, allow you to purchase prior to anything becoming known and being a potential issue.
Yeah, we like to say we should be your next call. Call us right after you put money down. And also it's important to know that I did this. I have a trip coming up in August and I keep adding, I made an initial down payment and I keep adding costs to the trip. So you can adjust your policy to add to that to make sure that your whole trip is covered. So as you go, you can add coverage. limits and stuff like that. So that's
Yeah,
important.
and that's a really great point too. So for time-sensitive benefits such as the pre-existing condition waiver, also the if you have CFAR, cancel for any reason added, you want to make sure that as you are making those additional payments, you then add those right after to your policy, just to make sure that you're keeping those coverages active.
Yeah, you always want to buy it in advance. Like, here's a good example, right? Let's say you're like, you buy everything, and like 1 week before you buy travel insurance, and then like 3 days before there's a massive hurricane, and you're like, oh, I'm covered. But caveat is that if that hurricane was announced like 2 weeks before, like as like a tropical storm that may have a potential, you are not covered because that storm had already formed well in advance. Um, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's important to like, yes, it's important to get coverage far in advance, but there are some, Megan, you can talk a little bit about this. Like if you're like last minute and you're like, oh, geez, I want to add on some kind of insurance, Megan, there is some options available last minute. What were those?
Yeah, so typically, or I should say technically, you can purchase a comprehensive plan up until the day before departure. But then again, God forbid something's already known, you're not going to have coverage for that.
Um, I know we have a lot of questions. Feel free to email me. I will try my best to answer them. If not, I will pass it on to the folks that insure my trip. We are coming up on the hour. I want to be conscious of everyone's time. One thing I will definitely say is that having answered emails about travel insurance for like 15 years, especially during COVID, when everyone thought they were covered for everything, I would say the biggest reason people get upset and they hate travel insurance is because they do not read their policy clearly. Do not make assumptions. And I say this in every post, you know, do not make assumptions. Even the best companies are still insurance companies, and no offense, but like, there's clear policy rules and, lawyers, and they've all done everything. Like, read your policy before you buy it. Make no assumptions about coverage.
Yeah, and I think, sorry to interrupt, but like not we don't take offense because we're not a travel insurance company. We help you find the right travel insurance company for you. So that's why I think we can help you go through the policies. So again, we know it's difficult and I still have no idea. I still work with somebody to know what's in my policy and know what's covered. Super
Yeah.
important.
Yeah. I mean, your example of the, would you be covered if you were drunk? Like, I use that all the time, like there is sort of insurance companies have the reasonable person test, right? Would a reasonable sober person do this? If the answer is no, you probably won't be covered. So, but with that, thank Megan and Megan for the lovely presentation. Again, I'm sorry if we didn't get to your questions, but email me at matt@nomadicmatt.com. You'll get an email tomorrow with this presentation, and you can always reply to that. And we'll have tons of links and resources for you in that email about everything that was mentioned today. So yeah, with that, enjoy the rest of your day and chat soon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you guys.